Welcome to Echo No More, clear, credible, court-ready documentation in high-conflict parenting. No hype, no legal jargon, no drama. I'm Dr. James. If you're new here, I'm really glad you found this space. This podcast is for protective parents navigating high-conflict custody situations, especially when the other parent is manipulative, emotionally unsafe, or unpredictable. I'm not a lawyer, and this podcast isn't legal advice. What I am is a parent who has lived through this system, and someone whose attorneys over and over again told me the same thing. Your documentation is excellent. They told me it made their job easier. They told me it protected my credibility. And they told me it changed how my case was received. That's why I'm sharing this. Not to teach you how to fight, but how to document calmly, clearly, and in a way courts actually understand. This is parent to parent, calm, grounded, and focused on protecting your child without losing yourself. One of the hardest judgments that courts make, and one of the hardest distinctions for parents to learn, is the difference between an isolated incident and escalation. From the inside, everything feels escalated. When you're living with ongoing stress, unpredictability, or emotional manipulation, your nervous system doesn't recognize events neatly. It just knows something isn't safe. So, when something goes wrong, it feels big. It feels urgent. It feels like this should finally be the thing that makes the system respond. But courts don't experience events from the inside. They experience them from a distance. And from that distance, they are always asking the same quiet question. Is this getting worse, or is this an outlier? That question matters more than almost anything else. Escalation is not about severity alone. Escalation is about direction over time. An isolated incident can be serious. Escalation is serious and increasing. This is where many parents unintentionally undermine themselves, not by lying, but by creating and treating every incident as escalation. When everything is framed as getting worse, courts stop hearing the phrase altogether. Escalation has a very specific meaning in court context. It means behavior is becoming more frequent, impact is becoming more significant, boundaries are eroding, interventions are no longer working. Escalation is not about how upsetting something felt. It's about what's changing. Let me slow this down because this distinction is critical. An isolated incident looks like this. Something happens, it's concerning, it does not repeat or it resolves. Escalation looks like this. Something happens, then something similar happens again, then it happens faster, closer together, or with greater impact. Escalation has momentum. Courts are very good at spotting momentum when it's documented clearly, but they are very skeptical of escalation claims that aren't supported by chronology. This is why restraint matters so much. If you label every incident as escalation, the real escalation becomes harder to see. I know this is uncomfortable to hear, especially if you've been living with constant stress. But documentation is not about validating how hard this has been. It's about showing change over time. Another thing that trips parents up is assuming escalation has to look dramatic. Sometimes, escalation is subtle. Shorter gaps between incidents, less recovery time for the child, increased interference, more confusion around routines, more involvement of third parties. Those are all signs of escalation, even if no single event looks extreme. This is why pattern tracking is more important than incident logging. Escalation lives in patterns. Isolated incidents live on their own. Courts need to see that difference clearly. There's another hard truth here that parents often resist. Courts expect occasional mistakes from parents. They expect miscommunication, scheduling errors, emotional reactions, poor judgment moments. What they don't expect is unchanging instability. Escalation suggests instability is increasing, not just present. And instability is what courts intervene around. When parents document every conflict as evidence of escalation, courts often respond by minimizing all of it. But when parents document calmly and allow escalation to emerge naturally, courts lean in. Because escalation documented neutrally is hard to dismiss. This is where your documentation posture matters. If your records sound alarmed from the beginning, escalation loses meaning. If your records start steady and then shift, shorter intervals, increased impact, repeated themes, escalation becomes obvious without being named. You don't need to write the word escalating. You need to show it. Another common mistake is assuming escalation means intent. It doesn't. Escalation is about effect. Courts do not need to decide why behavior is increasing. They need to decide whether it is. This protects you because you don't have to prove motive. You only have to document change. I want to speak directly to parents who are afraid of missing escalation now. You don't catch escalation by watching harder. You catch it by documenting consistently. Escalation reveals itself when your entries start clustering, issues stop resolving, the same themes appear closer together, the child's recovery takes longer. That's why monthly reviews matter, and we'll talk about those next. For now, I want you to hold to this. Not every bad moment is escalation, and that's okay. Saving the word escalation for when it truly applies protects your credibility, and credibility is what allows the system to act when it finally does. Before we close, I want to remind you of something important. You don't need to document everything, you don't need to be perfect, and you don't need to convince anyone with emotion. Calm documentation is power. If this episode helped you, you will find a full structured system in my guide, Clear, Credible, Court Ready. It's designed to support, not replace, your attorney. And if you want help turning everything you're documenting into something organized and usable, you can visit www.echonomocoaching.org to download my guide on how to create a clear, court-ready documentation binder. Take what helps, leave what doesn't, and most of all, take care of yourself. I'll see you next week.